Welcome to Talks with Tracy, with certified hypnotherapist, life coach, and licensed mental health professional, Tracy Claremont. Tracy will share her healing journey and explore the many meaningful alternative healing methods in our world today that will support you in doing your own deepest emotional healing. So please welcome the host of Talks with Tracy, Tracy Claremont. Let the suffering end and the healing begin.
Hello and welcome to Talks with Tracy. I'm your host, Tracy Claremont, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. Thank you all so much for joining me. I love and appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen to this show. And thank you, Bold Brave Television Network, for having me. Oh my gosh, today you're going to witness me reuniting with a long-lost colleague. I am so excited to have the incredible Dr. Neil Boris with me here today. Now, Neil and I, we go way, way back. I think a good 15 years or so. It's been a long time since we worked together. His work with me was really impactful as far as moving me forward in a career of attachment theory-based work with people. And I don't even think he knew that. He made a huge impression on me in a relatively short period of time. And I really thank him for that. Now, Neil, he knew me way back before my personal transformation. I've shared my own personal experience with healing my emotional issues. He knew me way back before that even happened. And I had not at that time made the connection between my own difficult, adverse early childhood experiences and my issues in my adult life. I hadn't even made that connection. In fact, back then, I was very focused on helping others and, hearing and healing other people's issues, which was super convenient, I would say, because it's easier to look at other people's issues than to turn that eye inward and look at your own. So maybe I was doing a little, some survival strategies going on there for myself. But anyway, I'm guessing he didn't even know at the time that I was such a hot mess because I did a really good job of concealing all of that, my thoughts and my feelings and my authentic self and my experiences. But we are not here to catch up on that today. Neil and I will have to catch up on that later. What we're here to talk about today is his incredible work in infant, child, adolescent mental health, and he is a true expert on attachment. So when I worked with Neil, he was kind enough to lend his incredible expertise to our tribal social services program that I was directing at the time, the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribal Social Services Program. Now, I had written a grant and to bring attachment theory-based prevention, intervention services to our community, and I wrote in doing that through the Circle of Security model. So this grant allowed us to provide education and take a small group of parents and children and videotape their interactions so that we could really look at their needs and like their strengths and their weaknesses and their relationship with their children, and then educate on the attachment needs of children and help them to strengthen those relationships. It was a really fun project. Super amazing, but it was a little more complex than that, but that's it in a nutshell. And Neil provided his clinical expertise and support to from a distance to our program for that. Now, when we were doing these groups, I had no idea Neil was so incredibly accomplished in his field, the field of infant, child, adolescent psychiatry. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't know that, because I may have been a little intimidated by his accomplishments had I known. Oh my goodness, he's super amazing. I did realize it was an honor to work with him then, but now I really realize what an honor it was to work with him. I really get it now. So Neil is the most down-to-earth, kind, considerate, committed, helpful psychiatrist I have ever met in my life. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. Oh my gosh, I love that. And really work with populations of people who experience incredible trauma and provide services to help them. In fact, that's how he ended up working with the program that I was directing in my community. So just listen to these credentials. Dr. Neil Boris, he's a child and adolescent psychiatrist. As such, he has served as a clinician, a teacher, a researcher. Yes, a researcher. So for those of you who need like the scientific data to believe these things that we're talking about, he's the real deal. I have him here today. So he currently works for Circle of Security International as both a trainer and in program development. He has been the director of incredible programs such as the Florida State University Center for Prevention and Early Intervention. He was also the chief of behavioral health at Nemours Children's Hospital in Orlando, Florida. And before that, and I think this was around the time that I was working with him, he was the professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Tulane University School of Medicine. So he's an absolute expert in social and emotional development of high-risk children under the age of 5. He is an absolute expert on attachment and early childhood experiences and how they shape and influence us today in our lives. So I'm super happy to have him here. Do you see now why I would have been a little intimidated had I known all that 15 years ago? He is truly amazing, and I'm so thankful to have him here today. So please join me in welcoming the incredible Dr. Neil Boris.
Hey, Tracy, thanks for that introduction. Now the pressure is on. I mean, you've built me up so much. I definitely going to fail this test, but that's all right. It's great.
I absolutely know it's all going to just flow naturally out of you as it always does. So Neil, I've dedicated this show to inspiring people to do that, look inward into their emotional experience and do the healing and, for themselves so they can transform their lives in the most beautiful ways and live fulfilling lives for themselves. But I also talk a lot about early childhood experiences because those are, our earliest injuries. And I really want to make that connection with you today of how our experiences can then flow over onto our children in our parenting and influence our children's own foundations and what they're going to build on. It amazes me because I live and breathe this stuff, and I know you do too. But it amazes me that there are so many people out there who don't make these connections or see their past experiences really important to their issues today. I was talking to somebody the other day who was like, you know what, that's in the past. I don't see how that means anything and influences what's going on with me today. And it's almost shocking to me because, again, I live and breathe this stuff, and I know you do too. So let's just jump right in. Where would you like to start with, or maybe what would you say to somebody like that?
Boy, Tracy, the first thing I'd say is, I hear you. Look, we often have life experiences that we just want to keep in the past. Isn't that human? I mean, I'm here for that. And at the same time, I think most folks, when they sit back and look at life, understand that what's happened to us as we've developed across the stages of our life is always and forever a part of who we are in one way or another. And if we're willing to start with that idea, things get interesting. And I know, Tracy, that you've thought a lot about this personally, professionally. So you've shared your own story of how kind of unpacking one's own relationship history can be so helpful in figuring out how to more deeply connect with people in your life now.
Right.
So I would tell that,
and more,
I hear you, I respect you, but there's other ways to think.
I also want to say more deeply connect with yourself, right? Like your own self, certainly people in our life, but ourselves, because that I think that's the biggest thing that we lose sight of with these different experiences. We disconnect from ourselves.
I agree, Tracy, 100%. Listen, relationships are all about us and one or more other person, right? And so to suggest that ourselves aren't important is to miss the entire point. This is between us and others. And when I talk to parents, they get that, right? Oh, wow, my kids bring out parts of me, sometimes things that I recognize from the past that I thought I was over and done with. And yet, here
Mm-hmm.
we are. What do we do in the here and now? So
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that. It's about us and others together.
Right. Yeah. So, talk to me. You've done such great work in this field, and um, I know that I've heard talks from you where you describe attachment as the critical social and emotional development that actually is the foundation for a child's health over time.
Hmm.
Uh, it's critical that this foundation that's developed is absolutely critical. I want to start our discussion by reminding people to not get into this, and I've said this on other shows. Please don't get into this thought where you minimize your own experiences in your childhood. So I find a lot of people are like, yeah, it was not good, but at least it wasn't this, and they minimize. But these experiences are really relevant to the individual, and we don't need to compare with other people's trauma. We need to recognize that all these experiences are impactful for ourselves. So we're really today, when we're talking about these relationships, we're speaking to everyone, everyone out there in the
Yeah.
world, not just the most horribly traumatized people, but everyone out there in the world. I mean, I have shared on this show too that even though I don't have big trauma indicators in my own history, I did make connections to trauma experiences that I wasn't aware of that set different um, behaviors and emotions that were kind of driving the bus for me into motion throughout my childhood and into my adulthood. But, you know, if I were to say, well, this is my trauma and this is this person's and this is really bad, then I would be minimizing my own experience. So I don't want people to do that. I want people to listen and really honor their own experience as we talk today. But I'd love to just start a discussion about the importance of early childhood experiences and you know, lots of the things that you talk about all the time. You know, what is attachment and why is it important? Can we just, you know, start with a general discussion like that?
Yeah, sure. That's a good place to start. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I've been fascinated by, Tracy, is just how we as humans learn things. And so if we start simply with that question, how do
Mm.
we as humans learn? Um, right away, it gets interesting. And one other question, which is equally interesting, is do we learn things before we even have language? Like, let's say
Mhm.
we develop the ability to put sentences together around age 2, generally speaking. Does that mean what happens in those first couple of years isn't important because we never had language to make sense of it? So, those two questions are really interesting ones to put on the
Mhm.
table right away. And they're super relevant to this question of what is attachment and why does it matter. Um, so probably the best thing for me is to start talking about learning. Are you cool with that?
Yeah, please. I think that's a great place to start because I also have worked with so many people that don't believe because a baby, a newborn baby, a baby in the first year, um, first couple of years doesn't have language, that they believe that they really don't have too many needs either, and that what their environment is around them and what the experience of the parents is doesn't really matter to them either. And that's not the
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. Not only is it not the case, but even questions that have been answered pretty definitively now in the last 20 years,
Mhm.
like, do babies remember things? For example, can a 3 month old or even a 3 day old baby remember an experience?
Mhm.
Obviously, Tracy, they can't tell us what they
Mhm.
remember verbally, right? We know that.
Mhm.
But there is tremendous amount of evidence that babies are
Mhm.
really good at remembering things. And
Mhm.
this is really eye opening to a lot of folks, especially parents. Oh my goodness,
Mhm.
here I thought, right, or assumed that because my baby can't talk to me, they're just kind
Mhm.
of passive in the world, like you say.
Right.
Um, for me as an infant psychiatrist, and that's kind of how I label myself, working with you, for example, in the child welfare world, one of the things that would
Mhm.
always dishearten me was when a child welfare worker would say something in a report about a family like, well, the 3-year-old is too young to remember, but the 7 and 8-year-old are showing these behavior problems that are related
Mhm.
to trauma. And
Mhm.
that just made me sad because, again, we know
Mhm.
very well that children well under 3 do remember. They don't
Mhm.
have the language to tell us, quote unquote, in words what they learned
Mhm.
from experiences, but they sure remember and are impacted by those experiences for better or for worse, right, Tracy? It's not
Right.
like trauma's the only thing that matters. In fact,
Mhm.
clarity matters too. If you have a really deep connection with your caregiver,
Mhm.
that's important.
Right.
Mm.
And uh, this is during a time like in early infancy where brain development is just like happening at a really rapid rate, correct?
That's absolutely true. And it's important to say that brain development is really complicated. We understand it, but we don't understand it fully even now. Here in 2025, there's as much we understand about brain development in early childhood as we do.
Mhm.
At the same time, just specifically talking about connections between nerves or neurons in the brain, well, from birth right through the first years, there are a tremendous number of connections built, many, many thousands per day as the brain
Mhm.
matures and grows.
Wow.
Interestingly enough, around age 7 or so, things start shifting more toward what we call pruning or disconnecting existing connections between nerve cells. And it turns out both the process of this blooming of connections and the process
Mhm.
of this sort of pruning, the official neuroscientific term, actually, pruning, both of them are important. And both of them, interestingly, Tracy, are experiential. In other words,
Mhm.
pathways connect that are being used socially and disconnect when they are no longer needed socially. So, our
Okay.
relationship environment, what's happening around us,
Mhm.
essentially sculpts our brain on some level. Now,
Wow.
that's a high level view, and that's about as much as we understand. But even that is pretty interesting, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's super interesting. And um, so you're saying that babies from birth are taking in all sorts of information from their relationships, from their environment,
Yeah.
and building their minds around this. So, how, like, how is it, like, tell me how a baby, let's see, what is my question?
Mm,
I have heard you say that um, uh, children, infants even, can read cues from their
yes. Signal.
caretakers
Mhm.
that show if things are okay. Like, so they can read a fear cue from
Yes.
their parent, like from the get-go. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that, how that even happens, and
Sure.
maybe talk a little bit about the science behind that? And
Sure.
because those are kind of how what they're building on is these cues from their caretakers, and also expressing their need and getting their needs met.
Yeah. It's super interesting, and you're tapping into this huge area of research that over the last 75 years or so, we've gotten pretty good at sorting out. And it comes back to this question about how do we learn? So I'm going to go back to that because I don't think I've
Mhm.
spoken enough about it. Most people are super familiar with school-based learning, right? We send our kids
Mhm.
to kindergarten. Let's just start with kindergarten around age 5 to learn things like math, reading, and so on. And
Mhm.
this type of learning, as we in the psychology field think about it, is what's called explicit learning. In other words, you're learning about symbols like numbers and letters and putting them together and making meaning out of them. And this is what kids spend years doing from kindergarten
Mhm.
as far as they go on in learning. And most of us are like, oh, yeah, that's learning. That's just one side of a two-sided set of learning experiences that's really important to humans. So, explicit learning, learning how symbols are organized and what to make of things, how to understand words or numbers, great, really important. Implicit learning, Tracy, is a whole nother way of learning. And the way I like to talk about implicit learning is to talk about learning to ride a bike. Because I think most people have been through that experience. You do it in childhood, maybe starting even when you're 2, getting balance on a little bike. I see kids in the neighborhood here, but you really get good at it a few years later. The issue with what we call implicit learning, like riding a bike, is that you can't hand someone a pamphlet like, hey, read this and then go ride a bike. It's not organized symbolically. You can only do it through experience.
Okay.
So implicit learning is also called experiential learning. Okay. And
Mhm.
that's a massive amount of learning that we do that is completely outside of school. How we relate to others, how we regulate our emotions, how
Mhm.
we seek connection, all of those things, Tracy, which we as humans know are really important, they're on
Yes.
the implicit experiential side. And that learning starts from the first hours of life, way before any letters or numbers. We are wired to learn through our social experience. And that's where attachment lives, and it's where a lot of the important features of being human live. I'm not going to say riding a bike isn't important. I love riding a bike. I'm, in fact, a cyclist. I've ridden all over the world, and it's one of my ways of enjoying life. But there's so much more there. And it's so much more than the written word and the numbers we understand. And I think that part, Tracy, is the part that we've come to really get our grips on in the last 50 years of research, how children learn experientially about things like relationships and emotions.
Wow. And so again, that comes in, that comes from their experience with their caretakers
That's right.
early
For
on.
sure.
They start to learn about all of that. And so, uh, what would be considered some, some traumatic kind of early childhood experiences in that regard? Would it be, a, a baby expresses a need,
Yeah,
cries because they have a need, their caretaker comes to them and meets that need. What happens when they don't have those kind of needs met? Like, what happens in that infant's mind?
sure.
What understandings do they start to develop about the world when needs are not met?
Well, it's such an important question, and it's the center of what attachment research has brought forward. So I'm glad you asked it. And you're a ringer, Tracy, because you know how to ask these questions well. And I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
And so I'll say that the, the first thing I should probably do to answer that question about what
Mhm.
happens when needs are or are not met for young children is to talk about a model to understand questions like that. Okay? Because
Right.
I could spit out a bunch of words right now, Tracy,
Mhm.
and it would probably confuse people.
Mm.
If Caleb's listening and he could put up this diagram of the circle of security, that would be cool because,
Oh, yay.
yeah, thank you. Here's this model. And I I'm really I spent a lot of years working with folks like you, Tracy, in
Mhm.
trying to help parents understand this diagram. It's kind of central because this is attachment reduced to one page, as it were.
Yes, right. Radical simplicity, you say, right?
Radical
I love
simplicity is what
radical
I'm saying.
simplicity
Yep,
because
yep,
I love being able to see something, take it, learn it, apply it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And look, kids from infancy through toddlerhood, and this is sort of a toddler version or a preschool version of the circle of security, through teenagehood and on into young adulthood, have needs in relationships. So you're asking me this question: what happens when needs aren't met? And I'm
Mhm.
saying, okay, let's just back up and talk about
Mhm.
this whole need map for a second. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So this need map, as you can see, is called the circle of security, and the subtitle is Parent Attending to the Child's Needs. Okay. So where is the parent on this diagram? Well, the parent is represented by these hands that you see sort of anchoring the circle. And next to the hands are two phrases that come right out of attachment theory, quite literally phrases that John Bowlby, who wrote the original books on attachment, came up
Mhm.
with. He studied animal behavior, actually, and decided that all this research on monkeys and other species that was being done in the 1950s. Some of you may have even heard about Harry Harlow and the wire monkey and the cloth monkey from psychology classes. Well, all that was about this attachment system that small animals of many different species seem to have early in life. They need protection from caregivers to negotiate the world,
Mm.
right? And so Bowlby said, well, the best terms for these needs are a secure base, and you see that on what we call the top of the circle, and a safe haven.
Mm.
Hmm, all right, that's helpful. Secure base for what? Well, again, based both on initially just theory and then, Tracy, of course, a lot of research,
Mhm.
Bowlby suggested that all children, here we have preschoolers on the screen, need support to go out and explore their worlds. And in fact, they are destined to explore the world if you go to an airport, Tracy, and watch families with 2-year-olds chasing them around the gate and the lounge and everywhere else, right? Those kids are riding the escalator, or they're going to check out some shiny object, or they're looking at the planes, or whatever. Kids are curious. They have to figure out how things work in the world. So they need a secure base from which to explore. And as they explore, and this is further along the top half of this diagram, we can break down what they need into 4 needs. As you see, the needs: watch over me, delight in me, help me, and enjoy with me. Those are the needs that children have in exploration. And this is true for 3-month-olds, 3-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 23-year-olds. It sort of doesn't matter. That's what our kids need from us. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we, the caregiver, are the secure base for them to explore the world. There it is. Then there's this other part of the circle, what we call the bottom half here, the safe haven side of the circle. And you see the little girl running back toward the hands. Then it says, I need you to welcome my coming to you. Okay, where the heck does that come from? Well, once again, we'll be studying alongside all these animal researchers and others, and finding that, no surprise to any parent who's ever been on the earth, when our kids are tired, when they're stressed, when they're scared, when they're overwhelmed, they are coming to us, right? They need protection and regulation from a caregiver. That's the safe haven part of things. And those needs, as you see, are listed out as protect me, comfort me, delight in me, and organize my feelings.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I've mentioned many times before that our children are not, or we are not born knowing how to organize our own feelings and regulate our own emotion.
That's
It'd be
right.
amazing if we were.
Be nice. Be nice.
But we're just not. We require a relationship to do that. I'm going to take a moment. I think it's time for us to take a brief commercial break. When we come back, though, I want to return to this image and talk more, continue the talk about this image and how this is the roadmap for meeting our children's attachment needs, and then talk a little bit more about how, if there's an imbalance, if a parent has strengths in one area and less strengths in others, and how that impacts our children. So we're going to take a brief commercial break. Thank you so much, Neil. And you're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television. We'll be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery, or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to EasySense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's EasySense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Hi, welcome back to Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I have the honor and privilege of talking with the amazing Neil Boris. Caleb, if you could put that image back up on the screen of the circle, and I'd really like to just kind of continue talking. There's a few more areas on this that we didn't get to before the break. You did talk about the top half of the secure base needed to go out and explore the world, and then you talked a little bit about the bottom half, the safe haven, welcoming your child into you when they need their emotional cup filled back up, right? So that they can go back out onto the circle. So can you kind of pick up where you left off?
Yeah, sure, Tracy. The thing about this diagram, and really, again, this goes back to the theory and research on attachment, is as most parents recognize, this is what happens all day with our kids. In other words, they go out to explore and they come back into us. And sure, as they grow and develop, that shifts in the dynamics of it. So babies can't literally walk out into the world to explore. So they're exploring with their eyes and their ears and their nose and so on. But they are still exploring the world. Teenagers, especially the ones that head off to college, like my first two are either already there or will be next year, they're pretty far out on that circle. But when the texts come in, Tracy, I'm always thinking, is this a welcome my coming to you moment or an ATM moment? You know what I mean? It's probably one of those two, right?
Right. And I've talked too in the past about the value of being with in these moments. Sometimes as parents we get caught up in fixing our kids' problems, and the value of just being with as our children go around this circle. And I will say, the more educated I became on this circle image, the more I saw it absolutely everywhere. I was seeing it in my children, in my dogs. I was seeing it everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
This circle, it's amazing.
Well, and again, attachment is a model for relationships. So it is everywhere. We like to say it's hidden in plain sight. This is a model for even adult relationships, or as you say, pet relationships. So we can change who's going out and who's coming in and what they look like. But really, this is how we as humans negotiate the world, moment in and moment out. And what's interesting is this hands, we started with the hands, as you see in the lower right of the diagram, and this is important, because parents are always wondering, well, okay, thank you. This helps for me to understand what my kids' needs might be and to figure out where they are on the circle. It's kind of the first thing we ask parents to do when they learn about the circle of security. Are they on the top half? Are they on the bottom half? Can you guess what the need is? Can you guess what they're feeling? And then we often ask another question related to the part of the diagram in the lower right. We often ask, well, is this a follow your child's need moment? Or do you think this take charge moment? So let's look at that lower right-hand part of the diagram, Tracy, because it's pretty important. It says, always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind. Now that's interesting, but if we think about the caregiver's job for a young child, what we want them to essentially channel, these are important things. You are the bigger, stronger, person. And we hope you bring wisdom and kindness in each moment to your kids' experience. If
Mm-hmm.
you do that, if you can be all those things at the same time, and you don't get to subtract one of them, Tracy, this is the tricky part. You
Mm.
gotta bring all four to the table at once. Then it's quite likely you can move to the next part, which is okay. Now I just need to figure out, what is my child's need? Is it watch over me, or is it protect me? Okay. So then I'm going to go into part two, which is, whenever possible, follow my child's need. Of course, following your child's need is super helpful and super important, but also taking charge sometimes as parents, that's required of us. Okay. And so that's the
Mm-hmm.
part of what the hands job is. Whenever necessary, take charge. So we talk about this, the 25 words. This is actually a little bit less than 25 words that you can summarize the job of the secure base and safe haven in 25 words or less. It's right here.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Right.
caregivers can sort of sort this out, where's my child on the circle? What is the need? Is this a follow me moment or a take charge moment? They're really going to begin to sort of manifest some security in their relationship with their child.
Right. Yeah, and so often based on our own experience in relationship with our own caregivers in our
Yeah,
own childhood, a lot of the times we will have difficulties on
that's
certain parts of this circle
that's right.
that we're not even aware of
Yeah,
that we have, and then and those kind of our own experiences, those are how our own experiences kind of get in the way of meeting these needs. I work with lots of women
yeah,
who have had huge trauma
yeah.
experiences, like sexual kind of assault experiences, sexual abuse in childhood. I've
Mhm.
worked with quite a few women who have a lot of difficulty with that bottom part of the
Sure,
circle
sure.
because that coming in doesn't always feel safe for
Yeah,
them,
yeah,
and then their child picks up on that energy, that feel, that clenching up when,
yeah.
so that's one example of how our own experiences can kind of get in the way of fully meeting our children's attachment needs. Is that
Tracy,
correct?
absolutely. It's a very good example. And I'll just say, having worked just as you have with many women who've had sexual trauma, even the top half can be difficult, right? Allowing our
Oh
kids
yeah.
out to the world is also
Yes.
going to create a lot of concern. Look, it's not a safe world out there. So I
Right.
can't let my kid out. They might get hurt. I got hurt. So you're spot on.
Mhm.
Our lived experiences, and especially things like trauma, influence us in the secure base safe haven world that our kids need.
Mm.
Whether we want it to or not, it is what it is. And what I'm always asking parents to do is to step away from blaming themselves,
Oh
especially
yeah.
who've been hurt by others, right? It's like, no, not your fault. No, I know you struggle, but let's work on this, right? Instead of
Mhm.
going into guilt, right?
Right.
So
Hmm.
I'm so glad you're bringing these kinds of examples up. They're common and they're hard to
They
negotiate.
are. Yeah, and one of my favorite things that Circle of Security says um, in their parenting group videos, one of the first things it says that the information is rated PG, right, for parental guilt.
Right.
I
That's right.
love that because, I mean, it's so easy to feel like we're failing our children. And the other thing Circle of Security says is that you don't have to get this 100% right. That's not even possible to
Right.
do this 100% correctly all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
so not possible, Tracy. Let's say we have three kids and they're all out on the circle and one of them need is delighting me on the top, but the other one's coming in because they just fell and bumped their knee and they need comfort me on the bottom. Well, good luck in the moment meeting each kid at each place. On the surface, it's quite literally impossible. So our
Right.
point, exactly that. Whoa, let's slow down. Kids don't need you to be some kind of perfect parent. There isn't one.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're willing to track what their needs are, follow those needs when you can, remember,
Mm-hmm.
whenever possible, it's not always. Take charge when you need to. Like, you want to play right now, but we have a doctor's appointment, so let's go and get in the car, into the car seat, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's real life too.
Mm-hmm.
That's what helps kids, is when caregivers can be confident that they understand what's possible here and now.
Right.
Not perfect or somehow meeting every need every moment. Like, forget about that. Forget about it.
Yes. I'll just tell on myself just for a moment.
Mm,
So I didn't have awareness for the longest time of trauma that I suffered in my early childhood.
sure.
And through my own healing, I discovered that when I was between the ages of 1 and 3, I had really severe hospital related trauma. I was in the
Interesting.
hospital
Mm,
frequently between the
mm,
ages of 1 and 3. And back then, they didn't let parents stay with you in the hospital. So my mom would have to leave me every night, sometimes 30 days in a row.
yeah,
I had multiple surgeries. So I realized through my healing that influenced me throughout my life and
sure,
caused big problems for me.
sure,
So
sure.
one of the ways it played itself out in my parenting, though, was big difficulties with the top half of the circle, with
Yeah,
letting my kids go out because I had this need to be at home.
yeah,
That was where I was safe. I didn't want to be anyplace else because I was forced to be someplace else that I didn't feel safe
sure.
repeatedly in my childhood. So
Yep,
all of this was unbeknownst to me. And
yep.
I did the most beautiful job, Neil, of non-verbally communicating to my children that it was not safe to go
Yeah,
out into the world.
of course.
I did such a beautiful job. My kids never went to spend the night at friends' houses, which is like a rite of passage developmentally, right? To start staying with your friends in adolescence. And my kids, they didn't do that because I had, in little subtle ways, told them it's not safe. You must stay home.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize it. That's just an example.
It's a perfect example of how it works, Tracy. And there's two things I want to say about this example. First of all, you as a caregiver, again, you could spend time, quote unquote, blaming yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But this
Which I
comes
did.
from, yeah, of course. Yeah, and okay, you know what? That's time spent. I'm not sure it's well spent, but it's time spent. Okay. But at the same time, again, as you just said, some of this goes back to very early experiences. As you say, you're not even aware of how it's playing out until
Mhm.
you get into deep self reflection, right? So here
Yes.
you are blaming yourself for something you can't even know. I mean, it's understandable, but it's not logical.
Right.
That's how
Hidden
life
in plain sight. That's what
implies that. That's right.
that means.
And that's what you said at the beginning. Look, a lot of how this helps us negotiate the world is in understanding ourselves so that we can meet our kids' needs in a different way. The,
Absolutely.
the other piece that you laid out that's so important, and this initially, when I learned all this, Tracy, kind of shocked me. It was one of the biggest findings in attachment research. And it goes like this. In your instance, since we're using your example, you're
Mhm.
not comfortable with your kids going out. And so you signaled them, as you said, you had all these different ways
Mhm.
to suggest it's not safe and it's not okay from your perspective. Okay.
Right.
So your question then is going to be, well, are kids able to read those signals? Do they modify their experience based on the parent?
Mhm.
Well, it's easy to say they're not going out to visit their friends because you're not driving them there, right? So, okay, boom, yes, they're impacted. But more important is by the time kids are a year old, they know that you're not comfortable allowing them out on the top. And they start miscuing. Instead of saying, I want to go explore, they start saying, oh, mommy, I need you now. So the capability, even of very young children, to read what's happening with their parents in the moment is one of the most striking and stunning things that we have learned. And the capability goes back into that first year of life.
Yes. You know, it reminds me of that one visual cliff experiment or that research. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. It's a very clever experiment put together back in the 1980s, Tracy, where they took 1-year-olds who are just able to walk, and they brought them into a laboratory, and they put them across a table that was actually a glass top table, and put the parent on the other end of the table. Okay? The toddler's standing up, and they put an attractive toy by the parent. Interestingly, though, the glass top table suggests to the baby visually that there's kind of a drop off between them and this toy / the parent. Okay. And so now the baby's like, oh, is this safe physically for me to go get this toy or not? Right? Mm-hmm. So it's a really interesting setup. Now the baby's in this bind, and the researchers are trying to figure out, well, how do babies figure things like this out at a year of age, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty interesting question. So they set it up so that they taught parents how to make a fear face. We all can make a face of fear, right? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
They said, okay, for this experiment, we're going to uncover this glass top table. The baby's going to see this drop off. We're going to put this attractive toy, and we want you to make a fear face. As soon as the baby moves toward the toy, okay? So mom's just sitting there with a neutral face, and then the baby moves toward the toy, and they follow instructions to create a big fear face, and the baby stops, turns around, and goes away from the visual cliff. Like, oh, my mom's telling me that's not safe. Okay? Mm-hmm. And in fact, it wasn't just some babies, it was almost all of them, okay? Babies read their mom's facial signals and decide, is this safe or not? Now, at 12 months, they don't have language, but again, we've already established this idea that they're very, very capable of understanding emotional cues.
Yes.
If, however, the parent smiles, and even if they start off with a fear face and then start smiling and being encouraging, the babies will take the risk and come over for the toy. And so again, that made it clear that babies negotiate their worlds through looking at their parents' emotions and tracking what is safe and not safe off the parents' faces.
Wow. Yeah, that's just fascinating, and it's a great example of what we're talking about, how so early on they immediately start gaining this life experience and this understanding about safety in their world via the relationship. So we are almost out of time, but one question I want to ask you before we're done, before I invite you back to talk more, because this is the tip of the iceberg. I want to ask you, is it possible to spoil an infant?
Oh, what a lovely
I've argued this. I have argued and argued with people about this so many times in my lifetime.
I love this question, and it's such a great one. I'll tell you this, we say directly in the Circle Security Parenting Program, you cannot spoil an infant. So I'll go right to the answer.
Thank you.
And then I'll explain why I think that's true. I'll also, on the side, always wonder with parents about what spoiling means, because
Mm.
that's a term that's so hard to define so often.
Mhm.
And so talking about spoiling and saying what is or isn't going to spoil a child, the first thing I want to do is let's define what we're worried about. Like, in other words,
Mhm.
what do we see spoiling as, and why is it something frightening to us? Okay.
That's
Um,
great.
but when a baby cries, they have a need. As we said a moment ago, we can guess at needs, but with little infants, that's often a whole lot of guessing. Are they cold? Are they tired? Are they hungry? Right? Are they frightened? Are they, right? It's just this long list, and it's not easy to tell. Okay.
Mhm.
Are they wired to be an excessive crier? Because some babies temperamentally cry a lot. Okay.
Mm.
So all these different possibilities. Um, I always tell parents, don't worry about being a perfect parent. If you are super stressed, let your baby cry, because
Mm.
they can read your stress, and
Mm.
you deserve some moments of just chilling, especially if you have a colicky, crying baby. Okay.
Mm.
You will not harm them, will not harm
Okay.
them by letting them cry. Okay. And equally, we can say with confidence that you will not harm them by picking them up and comforting them. Okay. Which is where the spoiling side comes in. Oh my
Mm.
goodness. If I pick them up and comfort them, am I somehow teaching them a lesson that goes against the world is tough and you got to figure out how to deal with it? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Because that's what a lot of parents begin to talk about when they talk about spoiling. Look,
Mm.
it's a hard world out there. If I coddle them, I'm doing them no
Mhm.
favors. Okay.
Right. Mhm.
And again, I appreciate that way of thinking. I appreciate any way of thinking about parenting. But I would
Right.
also argue you got lots of opportunities before they become adults to teach them how the world works. Trying to
Right.
teach them by not picking them up as a baby is not likely the best strategy. That's all. That's
Right.
all I'll say.
I love that. And that would be a great segue into another show, right? Because what you're talking about is like a parent's own beliefs and perceptions coloring their actions and their parenting. So a great
Yeah.
talk for another day. So we're already out of time. We're
Oh,
already out
Tracy,
of time. Neil,
sure.
can you please tell us how people can learn more about the Circle of Security or get in touch with you?
Yeah, like everything, it's all about the web these days, isn't it, Tracy? So you just
Yes.
search up Circle Security and you'll find our website, and we have tons of information. We have trainings for people there, mostly professionals, but we have books for parents, all sorts of
Oh,
things.
yeah.
So yeah, just visit us on the web.
Circle of Security, right?
That's right, circlesecurity.org.
Awesome. Thank
Or
you, Neil. It
.com.
was so nice seeing you. Oh,
Tracy, what a pleasure.
circlesecurity.com.
.com. I always get it wrong. I run the company and I get it wrong. What a pleasure. We didn't get to talk about our work together 15 years ago. So, yeah, we got lots of areas to cover. I'll come back. Let's
Yes.
have fun.
Oh, thank you. I so appreciate that. I really look forward to it. And I thank all of you out there who take the time to listen to this show. And we're all out of time. You've been watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I'll see you next time. Thank you, Neil.
This has been Talks with Tracy. Join us each week as Tracy and her guests will come together and realize that underneath it all, we are all the same and never alone. So join us each week and let Talks with Tracy be your safe place to land in your healing journey. Right here, Thursdays, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.